Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I am so glad you're here today because do I have a story for you? We all know and love Lieutenant Joe Kenda. I have watched the show Homicide Hunter for years. If you're familiar with the show, you know that each episode includes reenactments where an actor plays a younger Joe Kenda. The stories on that show are from the earlier years of Joe Kenda's career as a homicide detective. And on the show, this tall, square-jawed actor plays Joe Kenda during the reenactments. But did you know that before landing this role, the actor who plays one of our favorite real-life detectives was involved in a scandal so huge, it almost brought down a production company and got an entire TV show canceled. You are in for a wild ride today, so buckle up for this dark story. Today we are talking about actor Carl Marino and the scandal of the TV show P.I. Moms. Well, my. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Come with me back to 2010. Reality TV shows were all the rage. Big Brother, The Osbournes, The Simple Life, Jersey Shore, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, Survivor. They were all huge hits. And TV producer and show creator Lucas Platt was looking for the next big premise. Lucas was connected to the Lifetime Network, and as he was searching for an idea to become the next big reality hit, he came across this man, Chris Butler. Chris Butler is, well, he's something all right. Chris had an idea of his own. He had spent years working as a private investigator, and one day he thought to himself, what if I started employing women, unassuming women, to help me investigate my cases, like soccer moms? He thought, a big guy sitting in a black SUV draws attention, but a soccer mom sitting in an SUV just looks like she's picking up her kids or something. He thought, what if I begin employing women to do undercover work at my P.I. firm to catch cheating spouses and deadbeat dads? And as Chris Butler began to mull this idea around, he started talking with some women he knew, and they were into it. Before long, Chris had invented what he called P.I. moms, women who were private investigators, also moms, to assist him in his business. Chris and the P.I. moms were based in San Francisco. Chris ran Butler and Associates, a P.I. firm in the Bay Area. And up until that point, Chris had employed mainly off-duty and former law enforcement officers, mostly men. But he often found them to be competitive and too impatient for the type of work he needed them to do. This type of work requires sitting in a car or a public space for hours on end, hoping to catch the target of the investigation doing something naughty. And a lot of men just weren't cut out for this type of work. Women, Chris found, had more patience and more determination to catch cheaters in particular. Chris Butler ended up hiring a single female investigator. She was also a mom, and he found that her patience, her teamwork skills, and her ability to multitask were superior to those of her male counterparts. This positive experience led Chris Butler to begin hiring exclusively women and mothers, believing their inherent skills made them exceptional investigators. And you know what? Chris ain't wrong. There is nothing as fiery and determined as a woman trying to catch a cheater. There are women I know that have skills that dwarf a lot of investigators. So Chris sets aside some money and begins hiring more women. And soon, P.I. Moms was born. Very quickly, Chris began to get attention for his all-female, all-soccer mom private investigation firm. And in 2010, he was asked to appear on TV shows like Dr. Phil and The Today Show. People were interested in this idea. They liked the novelty of it, the fact that these women looked like your average suburban soccer mom, but they were, in fact, undercover investigators. And one day, Lifetime producer Lucas Platt was online when he came across a clip of the Dr. Phil show featuring Chris Butler and his P.I. moms. And Lucas knew instantly this was his next big hit. Lucas knew this would make a fantastic reality show, and he immediately contacted Chris Butler, who, as you can imagine, was very excited to find out that a large television producer was interested in his firm and in his work. Now, Chris Butler was a bit of a shady character. He gives me kind of, a little bit of a wannabe. He's not handsome. He's not charismatic, but he's one of those kinds of people who comes off as self-important, like he thinks he should be a bigger deal than he is. But apparently Chris did some good private investigative work, and soon he'd gathered this group of women interested in assisting him that had brought him some media attention. They were Michelle Allen, Charmaine Peters, Denise Antoon, and Amy Wiltz. The women were also very excited to learn that a television production company was interested in producing a show about the firm, a show that would be seen nationwide and would surely bring them some degree of fame. That's exciting, and the women were all in. Lucas Platt was moving full speed ahead. He got Lifetime to create a very large budget for the show, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and production was off and running. Now, before we go any further, full transparency, I knew about this story from years ago, but I did not know of its connection to Homicide Hunter until recently. It was maybe a year or so ago, and I saw a story on a small media pop culture site that I follow talking about this actor, Carl Marino. I wanted to talk about this story back then, but there wasn't any way to verify that the information on that website was true. This is one of those kinds of sites that posts like blind items, and you never know if they're true or not. I don't make episodes for my podcast or for YouTube unless I can verify that the information I'm bringing you is true. And I couldn't do that on this story then. So I didn't make an episode about this story, even though I was very interested in it and I knew you would be too. I ain't trying to get sued. And then last week, I'm watching one of my favorite current TV shows, Trainwreck on Netflix, and I see that they're talking about this story. I was sat. I turned on the show and took notes through the whole thing and was just itching to get to my computer to start writing this story because it's one I've been wanting to tell. It's one I've been wanting to bring to you guys because I know you will love it. Now there are a lot of details out there. We will go over every seedy, smarmy detail, and boy howdy, there is a lot of smarm and seeds, I don't know, involved in this shit show of a story. Lucas Platt, the producer, begins working very closely with Chris Butler, and he notices that there is this other guy kind of hanging around with Chris all the time. They make an odd pairing. This other guy hanging around with Chris is struggling actor Carl Marino. Carl is, I guess he's decent looking, not my type, but he's got the classic, square jawline and the deep set eyes. He's got a statuesque physique, very different from Chris. So Lucas Platt is talking with Chris Butler one day. And Lucas Platt, the producer, notices that Carl is like manning the phones while everyone is at lunch. And then he finds out that Carl also kind of works part-time at the P.I. firm. As Lucas says hello to Carl and goes to walk past him, Carl Marino grabs Lucas's arm and looks into his eyes and says, "You really need to put me on the show. I should be one of the main characters on this new show you're producing." Carl Marino tells Lucas Platt, the producer, that his previous acting work and his good looks would draw female fans to the new reality show, P.I. Moms. Lucas Platt would later say, "It felt like egotism run amok. I explained to Carl Marino that the show is called P.I. Moms, and he's not a mom. So Lucas Platt tells Carl Marino, "I'm sorry, but the network has already decided that it's going to be Chris and the moms." And that was that. Well, Lucas thought that it was the end of the discussion, and he thought nothing more about it. But Carl was not done with Lucas Platt or with P.I. moms. Now I'm going to jump ahead a little bit for those of you who might not be familiar with the job Carl Marino gets in the future, the job of portraying a young Joe Kenda on the TV show Homicide Hunter. That happens after the events we're talking about today. Homicide Hunter is a very popular crime show on ID where this older, grizzled homicide detective, Joe Kenda, tells his real-life case stories to the audience, while reenactments of the stories play behind his narration. Joe Kenda is very sarcastic and sardonic. He sometimes says things that are politically incorrect. He doesn't care, and that's why we love him. He's brutally honest about the criminals he's investigated over the years. He calls the criminals names. He talks about how stupid they are, and he just has a way of making you chuckle, even when he's telling very dark stories. Joe Kenda also has a huge heart and a true hatred for people who hurt others, and that makes him lovable. And he is the reason that Homicide Hunter is such a huge hit. There's a lot of true crime shows, but Homicide Hunter is different because of Joe Kenda and his hairpiece. Joe Kenda's catchphrase is, "Well, my." He says that phrase over and over at the point in the episodes where he basically figures out who the killer is. There are memes and t-shirts with the catchphrase on it. And it's also become kind of a pop culture phrase, meaning you've been caught red-handed. I personally love the show, and it's because of Joe Kenda. He makes the show. I don't find myself that drawn to true crime shows that have reenactments, but I watch Homicide Hunter because of Joe Kenda and the way he tells the stories. That makes the show different for me. But it's also the reason I was afraid to talk about this story. Carl Marino is now a very recognizable figure on a very popular TV show, and I didn't want to run the risk of telling this story about him in case it wasn't true. I really wanted to tell it, but I am a licensed and certified paralegal. I ran a large law firm for 7 years, and the rational side won out, and I decided not to talk about it until now, because now we know that it is all true, and it puts those reenactments in a new light, at least for me. So now that we all know who Carl Marino is, keep what he goes on to do later on in mind as we go through the rest of the story. So back in 2010, a new character enters this story. This is journalist Peter Crooks. He is a San Francisco-based writer, and he'd heard about this new reality TV show, P.I. Moms. He knew it was being produced in the area and that it was about a local private investigation firm. Well, Peter gets an invitation to write a story on P.I. moms while the show is still in production. Peter went for a ride along with Denise Antoon, one of the P.I. moms, on a day that she was tasked with catching a cheating man with his mistress. So you've got the camera crews there, you've got the P.I. mom there, and you've got a journalist there writing about the whole thing. Peter and Denise spent the afternoon sitting in a car, and then it happened. Their target, the cheating man, pulled up in the parking lot they were waiting in and got out of his car with his mistress. The two of them began to walk towards the restaurant they were supposed to eat at, and as they walked by, they stopped right in front of the car that Denise Antoon, the P.I. mom, and Peter Crooks, the journalist, were sitting in, and the couple embraced and then engaged in a long kiss. Denise was ecstatic. She had just caught undeniable proof on camera that this guy was cheating on his wife. Peter, the journalist, was happy he'd been there to see it for himself, and he knew it would add a very interesting element to his story. 2 days later, while Peter was working on his story, he got an email from a spam account, and it was signed a concerned citizen. The name attached to the email account was Ronald Rutherford. What does the email say? I'm going to read it to you. I am writing this as a courtesy to you. It would be a mistake to publish an article on the P.I. moms and Chris Butler. Chris totally played you. The case that you sat in on was scripted. All the participants were employees or paid actors. I am not sure what your intentions are with the article, but I hope that publishing it is not in your plans. Thanks, a concerned citizen. Peter Crooks was shocked. He had not suspected that this cheating he witnessed had been staged. It all looked very real to him. And then he got angry. He felt like he'd been treated like an idiot. He figured Chris Butler was behind this, but Peter didn't want to talk to Chris. He wanted to talk to Lucas Platt, the producer. So Peter and Lucas meet up. Lucas heard about the email. He was beside himself. He assured Peter that the show was not scripted, that everything they were doing was real. Peter said, I am staking my reputation on this show. What you witnessed was not scripted. That happened. Lucas told Peter that all of the cases being worked by the P.I. moms were real cases and that the clients had been vetted. Well, Peter Crooks believed Lucas. He could tell he was being sincere. But now Lucas Platt was incredibly concerned. Someone was trying to sabotage this show, this TV show that he'd convinced Lifetime to put hundreds of thousands of dollars behind. Lucas had another problem. Chris Butler had overpromised and he wasn't delivering. His agency was not as busy as Chris had made it out to be. There weren't a lot of cases for Lucas to produce episodes on. And so that was a huge issue as well. Lucas Platt knew the show was in trouble, so Lifetime brought in a story writer to drum up more business for Chris. This story writer started to go through police records and find cases of, domestic violence, arguments, things where there might be domestic drama that the P.I. moms could investigate. While she was doing that, Lucas Platt was dealing with another production problem. Chris Butler was boring as hell on film. He was awkward, he was quiet, and that does not make for good reality TV. Lucas decided he had to focus 90% of the show on the moms. They were interesting. They had great backgrounds and life stories. Some of them have been through tragedy. And so Lucas decided to heavily focus on the moms and not on Chris. Chris would be very much limited in the edits. So the show continued with production despite all of these problems it had already encountered. The show writer hired by Lifetime discovered that there was a man in the San Francisco area who was taking work as a private investigator, but this man was not, in fact, a licensed PI. So the show producers decided they would do an episode on catching this unlicensed PI in the act. They were going to set up a sting operation and film it all. So the unlicensed PI is contacted by a client who is actually one of the producers of the show. This client says, I have a case I need you to work on. And they agree to meet so this fake client can tell the fake PI they want to hire him. On the day the shoot was supposed to happen, the PI moms got in place and waited for the unlicensed PI. Lucas Platt was expecting a phone call to let him know how the sting went. But he never got a phone call. Back at the scene where the meeting was supposed to happen, the PI moms were calling the unlicensed PI over and over, but he wouldn't answer his phone. They called for 2 hours, and then he finally picked up the phone and said, I'm not coming. I know what you guys are trying to do. Someone called me and tipped me off. The PI moms were angry, but Lucas was beside himself. Who in the world was continuing to sabotage this TV show production? Who had tipped off their target? Lucas Platt called the unlicensed PI and came clean. Lucas said, yes, we were planning to film you and bust you for doing work you're unlicensed to do. Would you be willing to tell me who tipped you off? Well, the unlicensed PI said, I don't know. I just got this phone call, but I could call the number back and let you listen in on the phone call. This is just crazy. So the unlicensed PI calls the number back from the tipster, and he put the tipster on speakerphone and let Lucas Platt listen to the call. Lucas immediately recognized the voice of the tipster. It was Carl Marino, the struggling actor who'd wanted so badly to be a part of the show P.I. Moms. I've always thought this guy seemed a little dorky on Joe Kenda. What kind of a grown man acts like this? The unlicensed PI had also received an email from the tipster. What was the name on the email address from the tipster? Ronald Rutherford, the same name on Peter Crook's, the journalist's email. And now everyone involved knew that Chris Butler's own friend, part-time employee, actor Carl Marino, was the saboteur. The same Carl Marino that many of us know as young Joe Kenda from the TV show Homicide Hunter. He was trying to ruin the show P.I. Moms. But why? Why would Chris Butler's own friend be working against him? Could it be out of pure jealousy, or was there something more going on here? Lucas Platt immediately called Chris Butler and told him what was going on. Lucas expected Chris to be furious, but he wasn't. Chris just played it off. Lucas said, "Chris, do you understand? This is one of your own employees. This is a friend of yours, and he's going to ruin this entire project." Chris was like, "Yeah, well, I'll talk to him." Lucas Platt could not believe what he was hearing. He was absolutely shocked. Why wasn't Chris angry that his friend and employee was trying to ruin his television show? Lucas Platt actually started to believe maybe these two guys are lovers. Maybe they're involved and this is deeper. About this time, the network, Lifetime, sent Carl Marino a cease and desist letter and put him on notice that if he interfered with the TV production again, the network would sue the hell out of him. Lucas thought this would be the end of it. For a second time, he was wrong. Chris Butler began acting strangely. He was irritable. He was disconnected. He didn't seem to care much about the TV production. Lucas even called Peter Crooks, the journalist, and told him, "Hey, this has been this Carl Marino guy all along. He's the one that told you we had faked this scenario." Peter thought, well, at least they've rooted out the problem and the TV show can go on. Peter Crook was wrong as well. Days later, Peter Crooks got another email from Ronald Rutherford, from Carl Marino, young Joe Kenda. And this time the email said, "I am hesitant to tell you this, but Mr. Butler is involved in some serious criminal activity right now. Chris Butler is selling large amounts of marijuana along with other drugs, prescription drugs, Xanax, and steroids, that has been confiscated by the Costa County Task Force. You see, the commander of the task force is taking the drugs from raids and giving them to Chris Butler to move. And then Chris gives them to, well, me. I have not sold any and I don't want to. I am not a drug dealer. I don't want anything to do with this." I swear, you guys, this is all true. When Peter Crooks read this email, he was stunned. What started out as a cute little article about some soccer moms as P.I.s has now turned into dirty cops stealing drugs out of the lockup and selling them back out on the streets. Peter Crooks replied to Carl Marino and told him, "You've got to go to the police." Carl said that he was scared and asked Peter to help him. So Peter called a cop friend of his, a man named Daryl Jackson, and he relayed Carl's claims to Daryl. So we've got a journalist ratting out a cop to another cop. It's a huge deal. It's police corruption. Peter, the journalist, tells Daryl Jackson that he needs to go and speak with Carl Marino. Daryl calls Carl Marino, and Carl comes into the DA's office at nighttime. Carl starts telling Daryl the whole thing. Carl was talking so fast about P.I. moms, reality TV, Dr. Phil, stolen drugs. Daryl Jackson had to tell him, slow down. I can't keep up with you. Carl Marino then plops down a pound of pot and tells him that Chris gave it to him to sell it. Officer Daryl Jackson then contacted Robert Blem, a special agent with the Drug Task Force. Officer Blem was tasked with catching this officer who was supposedly stealing drugs from the evidence locker and selling them. So together, Officer Jackson and Officer Blem wire Carl Marino up and send him in for a conversation with Chris Butler. The cops listen as Carl tells his friend Chris that he's sold the drugs he was given and that his buyer wants more. Chris tells Carl, "No problem. I can get you all the drugs you need." And then Chris goes into this rant about how Carl has to stop sending these emails because he's going to ruin the show. In this conversation, Chris says, "This show is all I've got. I don't have movie star good looks. I'll lose everything." Chris tells Carl that he understands why Carl is mad that he can't be in the TV show, but that he can't kill the project. And as the cops listen into this conversation, they're like, Why is this guy more worried about the TV show than he is about moving stolen drugs? Now, the TV show was still in production throughout all of this. And the P.I. moms come upon the story of a missing 15-year-old girl, and they want to try and help find this missing girl. These women were really P.I.s. They really wanted to help. The producers thought this was the perfect case for the show, so they put a bunch of money behind the case. Helicopters and pilots were hired out to start looking for this missing girl who was thought to be a runaway. The P.I. moms were working overtime to follow leads in hopes of helping this family find their missing daughter. The production company is spending all this money on this case. They've got helicopters in the air. They've hired other private investigators to help. And as all of this is going on, Lucas Platt, the producer, gets a call. The missing girl has been found. Not by the P.I. moms, but by Carl Marino. I am not making this up, you guys, I promise. Lucas Platt, he wants to murder Carl Marino at this point. Apparently what happened is that Chris had turned the missing girl case over to Carl before telling him to back off. Well, Carl continued to work the case. And when he found the missing girl, instead of calling the TV production crew or the P.I. moms so that the camera crew could be there and the production company could capture all of this happening, Carl Marino instead called the police so he would get all the credit. This guy is unreal. He was so mad that he was not going to be on this show that he was determined to ruin it. I mean, I know they say actors have big egos and half of them are delusional, but this is just insane. The P.I. moms were so angry that one of them later said she was ready to punch Carl in the face. When the P.I. moms found out that Carl had found the girl, they rushed to the scene where the girl had been found. Carl Marino was right there in the middle of it all, trying to get as much camera time as possible. He was determined to become the star of P.I. moms one way or another. Well, this fiasco was the final straw. The network called Lucas Platt and told him the plug was close to being pulled. This was rapidly turning into a disaster. But Chris Butler had much larger problems in his life than losing his reality TV show, because in one recorded conversation with Carl, with the police listening in, Chris told his friend that he had 3 pounds of crystal meth he needed to move. The cops knew they had to step in and stop this. They couldn't sit by while that amount of drugs went back on the street. They set up a sting operation between the corrupt cop, Chris, and Carl. The cops wired Carl and gave him $10,000 in cash and sent him to the P.I. firm to buy the drugs from Chris. The entire thing was captured on hidden camera. Carl was also wearing a camera. The moment the drugs were handed over to Carl and Chris had the cash in his hands, the cops rushed in. Chris Butler was arrested and taken into custody. The P.I. moms were in shock. They thought they were working with a reputable P.I., but he turned out to be a drug dealer. Lucas Platt then got the devastating phone call and had to pass the word on to the network. The show production was stopped immediately. Lifetime pulled the plug. There would be no TV show, and we, the public, would never see a single episode of P.I. Moms. The women were very angry and upset. Their boss was a liar and a fraud, and his friend and their fellow co-worker, Carl Marino, was doing everything he could to sabotage their dream. Chris Butler was charged with trafficking, among many other things, and soon took a plea deal. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Lucas Platt was finally left with some answers. The reason Chris Butler was allowing his friend Carl to sabotage the show and didn't want to fire him or get into a fight with him is because the two men were involved in moving drugs. Well, Carl says he never actually did it. Carl Marino knew all of Chris Butler's dirty little secrets, dirty, huge secrets. Despite everything Carl Marino had done, he was hailed a hero as a whistleblower who uncovered a crooked cop and a drug dealer. The women, they were made out to be a joke, wannabe reality stars who wanted fame. And then Carl Marino went on to land the role that would make his face familiar to so many of us, that of young Joe Kenda. Chris Butler went off to prison and admitted to hiring female decoys to target men, married men who were suspected of cheating, using these female decoys to sit in bars with their targets to get them drunk and then get them into a car to drive away. Once in the car, the decoy would alert the police and the man would be arrested for DUI. This is known as a dirty DUI scam, and it's illegal. Chris Butler was charged with that as well. In 2012, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison and ordered to pay a $20,000 fine. Chris was eligible for release in 2020, but even outlets like People and CNN couldn't find information on where he is now, so I sure as hell don't know. Carl Marino, he claims he was offered a generous amount of money to participate in the Netflix documentary I have recapped for you today, but he refused. He must have made some good money on Homicide Hunter because he no longer has that job. The show stopped production in 2020. Carl Marino is not on Joe Kenda's new show, American Detective with Lieutenant Joe Kenda. I still watch the old episodes of Homicide Hunter, but I'll tell you one thing, I will never look at that show the same. I am telling you guys, when I saw this come up on Netflix, I could not wait to bring it to you. If you have Netflix, the show is called Trainwreck. Each episode is a different story. They've done like Astro World. They have one called Poop Cruise about that cruise ship that got stuck in the ocean. This episode is called P.I. Moms. So it'll be Trainwreck, P.I. Moms. I sure appreciate you joining me today. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. This is my podcast, Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. It's on Apple and Spotify, and I post brand new episodes every Monday and Wednesday. I want to give a special thank you to my patrons and remind you that if you join my Patreon, you will get some bonus content you can't see or hear anywhere else. I hope you enjoyed this very kooky story today. I sure appreciate you. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I'll see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.